Stop playing fair, be ruthless. The world doesn't reward kindness, it rewards control. Johan Liebert, the perfect monster in human skin, understood this truth better than anyone. He didn't need fists or violence. He ruled with silence, with shadows, with a smile that could end a life without lifting a finger. Today, we uncover 7 of Johan's darkest power lessons. Not the common tactics you've heard before, but the hidden, buried truths that made him terrifyingly effective. Lessons so rare, most people never recognize them, yet they shape politics, relationships, and influence all around us. Once you learn them, you'll never see power the same way again. Let's step into Johan's abyss. Lesson 1. The beauty of emptiness. The cruelest power doesn't come from violence, it comes from emptiness. When you convince someone that their life has no meaning, no weight, no destiny, you strip away their shield. A person who believes in purpose will fight. A person who believes in nothing will surrender. That is why the most dangerous manipulators don't argue with people's values. They erase them. Emptiness is not silence. It is a void that consumes. Once you hollow out someone's sense of purpose, they begin to drift. And in that drifting, they cling to the first hand that offers direction. That hand doesn't need to be kind. It only needs to exist. This is the hidden psychology. Humans don't fear death half as much as they fear living without meaning. Meaning is the rope that keeps them steady. Cut the rope, and they beg for someone to tie it back. That someone becomes their master. You see it in cults, where followers are first broken down until they feel worthless, then rebuilt to serve the leader. You see it in relationships, where one partner convinces the other they are nothing alone. The lesson is brutal. Don't confront people's strength. Erase their meaning. Because an empty vessel doesn't resist. It waits to be filled. Lesson 2. The mirror effect. The most dangerous manipulator doesn't shout orders. He doesn't even tell you what to do. He holds up a mirror. Instead of planting ideas, he reflects the ones you've buried. The anger you hide. The envy you deny. The revenge you secretly crave. Once you see that reflection, resistance crumbles. Because it doesn't feel like someone else's command. It feels like your truth. That's the brilliance of the mirror effect. No chains, no force, just permission. A subtle nod that whispers, "This is who you already are." And suddenly, people justify their worst impulses. They burn their own lives down, convinced it was their choice all along. Look closely at history, at politics, at toxic relationships. The pattern repeats. Leaders rise not by forcing darkness, but by reflecting it. Charismatic figures don't invent hate or greed. They amplify what was already there. Lovers in abusive dynamics don't always demand loyalty. They reveal the fear of abandonment already present. Here's the buried lesson. People don't crave to be led. They crave to be validated, even in their darkest desires. Give them a mirror, and they'll walk into the fire themselves. Because the scariest prison isn't built by others. It's built when we finally believe our own reflection. Lesson 3. Disconnection equals to domination. Power rarely comes from strength. It comes from isolation. Break the bonds that keep a person grounded, and they collapse long before you ever touch them. The quiet manipulator understood this perfectly. He never needed to fight his victims head on. Instead, he sliced away their connections. Family, friends, anyone who could remind them who they truly were. Once those ties snapped, the victim stood alone in a world that suddenly felt colder, emptier, hostile. And in that silence, a single whisper could rewrite their entire reality. Humans are pack creatures. Alone, they grow desperate. Identity begins to blur, self-worth begins to shrink, and soon they cling to the first hand that reaches out, even if that hand is leading them to the edge of the abyss. You see the same tactic everywhere. Abusers slowly cut their partners off from friends until there's no one left to call. Cults demand followers sever ties with the outside world, so the group becomes the only family. Even corporations isolate workers in rigid systems, so loyalty shifts from self to company. Here's the buried lesson. If you want control, don't break a person's body. Break their connections. Once they are alone, you don't have to dominate them. They'll dominate themselves. Lesson 4. The myth of equality. One of the most seductive lies we've been taught is that all humans are equal. It sounds noble. It sounds moral. But in the wrong hands, it's a weapon. The shadow-smiling manipulator knew that if you remind people they are ordinary, replaceable, and no different from the masses, You crush the very spark that makes them resist. Individuality is where rebellion is born. Destroy that, and the herd will obey. Think about it. People fight for freedom when they believe they're unique. But when convinced they're just another face in a crowd, equal only in death, they surrender. And the surrender isn't forced. It feels logical, natural, like gravity pulling them down. That's the buried psychology here. Equality, twisted, becomes erasure. When a crowd sees itself as one faceless organism, it longs for a shepherd, even if that shepherd leads them to ruin. Look at propaganda that tells citizens they're just workers. Look at toxic systems that reduce people to numbers. Look at ideologies that strip away identity for the sake of unity. Every time, individuality dies and control thrives. The cruel truth? People don't fear being powerless. They fear being ordinary. Strip them of uniqueness, and they'll beg to be led. Lesson 5. The whisper of inevitability. The sharpest command is never spoken as an order. It's whispered as inevitability. When people are told they must do something, they resist. But when they're convinced the outcome was already written, resistance feels pointless. That is the genius of inevitability, turning choice into an illusion. The quiet manipulator never shouted, "Obey me." Instead, he framed reality as if every path led to the same end. He planted seeds with lines like, "This was always how it had to be." Words so subtle, they didn't feel like instructions. They felt like fate. Psychology calls this fatalistic conditioning. Once a person believes their destruction is inevitable, they stop fighting. They walk willingly into the fire, comforted by the lie that they never had a chance anyway. It doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like acceptance. You can see this everywhere. Political systems whisper that change is impossible, so people give up. Economies convince workers that the game is rigged, so they stay trapped. In toxic relationships, the abuser convinces the victim that leaving is futile, so they never try. Here's the buried lesson. Power is enforcing submission. It's creating the illusion that submission was destiny all along. The most ruthless chains aren't made of iron. They're made of inevitability. Lesson 6. The erasure technique. True power often isn't in being seen. It's in being unseen, yet impossible to forget. The quiet manipulator mastered disappearance. He left no evidence, no trail, no fingerprints. He moved like a ghost, present enough to haunt, absent enough to remain untouchable. People feared not what he did in the light, but what he might do in the dark. That absence became louder than any presence could. This is the erasure technique. Erase your visibility, but let your shadow linger. When people cannot predict you, cannot track you, cannot even prove you exist, their imagination does the work for you. Fear multiplies in the silence. Control thrives in the unknown. History shows us the same tactic. Intelligence agencies operate best when no one knows their hand. Dictators maintain power by being everywhere and nowhere at once. Even in personal dynamics, the most controlling partner is often the one who withholds presence. A text unanswered, a silence stretched too long, until the other person collapses under uncertainty. The buried truth? Visibility limits you. Invisibility magnifies you. The most ruthless power doesn't come from constant action. It comes from erasure, from teaching others to dread your absence more than your presence. Because when you vanish, you don't disappear. You expand. Lesson 7. The gift of nothingness. The most terrifying gift isn't love or loyalty or even power. It's nothingness. The shadow in human skin offered his victims a release that looked like freedom, but was actually a trap. The freedom to stop caring, to stop searching, to stop fighting. He whispered that their struggles, their pain, their hopes were illusions, and that by letting them go, they could finally be at peace. It sounds merciful. It feels liberating, but it's annihilation dressed as kindness. Because once hope is gone, what remains is dependency. People who no longer believe in tomorrow will follow anyone who tells them what to do today. That's how nothingness enslaves, not by chains, but by erasing the will to choose. You see this tactic in cults where followers are told life outside has no value, in abusive partners who convince victims that without them, the world is empty, in ideologies that strip people of individuality and purpose until obedience feels like relief. The buried lesson is brutal. True control doesn't come from giving people meaning. It comes from taking meaning away until they beg you to replace it. The cruel paradox? When you give someone nothing, you own everything. Because emptiness, once accepted, never lets go. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hides in silence. Sometimes in a smile. Sometimes in the emptiness you carry inside. These 7 lessons prove it. Control isn't about strength. It's about breaking meaning, breaking certainty, breaking you. But remember this, once you open the door to darkness, it doesn't close. If you play with these tactics carelessly, they won't just change others, they'll change you. If this glimpse into forbidden psychology shook you, don't just leave with fear. Stay, subscribe, join this circle where the shadows are decoded and the truths no one dares to speak are revealed. Because here, the darkness never ends.